Welcome back everyone. Today we are returning to the final part of the Candace Owens and Piers Morgan debate. This time we begin with Piers asking his most famous question of the last 12 months, which is, what should have been an appropriate response by Israel? Let's take a look.
The question would be, let's go back to October the 8th. What should have been Israel's response to that, given the scale of it?
Well, first and foremost, there had to be a response. And we know that the IDF is very capable of a surgical tactical response because they've done it over the years plenty of times in which they're able to take out terrorists. We just watched them execute a beeper attack and hit out Hamas terrorists. So
I think it's a very relevant point, because if they could do that to 3,000 Hezbollah terrorists, why couldn't they be as precise with Hamas?
Because they don't want to be. They want to level it because they want to take it over. And I believe, and you can see this, by the way, in the videos of the settlers dancing. I mean, why do they have settlers already ready? Doesn't that seem strange that this quickly you already have settlers that are going in and taking over the territory, and you're hanging, children's toys?
But what should Israel have done, though? What would have been?
They should have just taken out the Hamas terrorists.
How do you do that when they're embedded amongst civilians?
Listen, I'm not an IDF minister, but what I can say is, going back to that beeper attack, it seems pretty precise. And there have been many examples of them doing that in the past. So I just don't buy the BS of we actually just have to take down entire towers and buildings. It doesn't even make sense. I mean, I'm not an engineering major, but if you're telling me that there's a tunnel under everywhere, you only have to hit a tunnel at a couple of points to render it completely useless. So the idea that they had to level the entire place plus go out into refugee camps doesn't make any sense. Like I said, I think their goal, and as they do, they have all these policies mowing the lawn, where they kill a certain amount of Palestinians every year. This is genocidal. The aims here are genocidal.
I think this was a very good response by Candace. Firstly, she acknowledges that there had to be some sort of a response. She also explained very well that if the beeper attack was so precise, then why couldn't something similar be done instead of carpet bombing the entire country? Funny enough, Piers even agrees. She also destroys the argument of the tunnel system which has been compared to the New York subway system by Israeli officials. If you ask me, they must be living in La La Land. Candace again says, well, you only need to target a few areas to render that as inhabitable. The next clip, Piers reads out a statement from Candace's father-in-law which contradicts her views and opinions. Let's take a look.
Lord father-in-law, very highly well-regarded man in this country, Lord Michael Farmer, said the Israeli Defense Forces were acting in a highly accountable way in an extremely complex and difficult environment. We cannot forget that they have been forced to prosecute this war. Obviously, a different interpretation of events there. Have you discussed this with him?
Yeah, I mean, I try to separate my politics from his politics because I think it's unfair in any family to say, well, what does your mom think? What does your cousin think? What does my sister think? My sister's a Democrat,
I think her response there just goes to show the maturity and professionalism of this woman. She keeps her views and politics separate to that of her family's. Not only that, but she openly states that previously she was pro-Israeli, and it was the likes of social media that changed her perspective.
What I can say is I deeply respect him. He's done a tremendous amount of work, and I want to say this. I was on the Zionist side. Let's not forget this. For years, I worked for Prager University. I worked for Daily Wire. And so I was much more sympathetic to, I would say, the Zionist cause throughout my entire career. But the difference is, and I think we spoke about this on my podcast, generationally, with the access of social media, being able to see these things every day versus the person who, as you described it, as you are still, because you're kind of a combo, who hears the thud of the newspaper and reads the newspaper and believes that, or, this kind of becomes or colors their worldview, is very different. Social media completely transformed my perspective on what's happening in Israel and Palestine. And I'm disgusted with myself for not being more awake.
Okay, but that's
to
interesting, because can social media also, can it wrongly skew a narrative? In other words, can it reinforce one view, which is very quickly established? I mean, I was astonished how quickly the narrative after October the 7th became anti-Israel and very pro-Palestinians stroke Hamas in many cases. I found that quite terrifying that was the case, notwithstanding my own view about how Palestinians have been treated before that. Could it be, I mean, you're a very smart person, but you say that you were affected by social media. Social media was incredibly partisan behind the Palestinians almost immediately, to the extent where I would argue, looking back at the whole time, that I've argued persistently, well, what would be proportionate? I can't think of anything Israel could have done, given that Hamas were embedding themselves amongst civilians. I don't know how they could have attacked Hamas without being criticized, whatever they did.
They would have been criticized, but not to this degree. Everyone was expecting a response, and myself included.
I think this just goes to show how powerful social media is. The majority of the videos and clips we've seen online and across the majority of news stations were clips that were in fact recorded by civilians on the ground witnessing it firsthand. I do agree with Piers, sometimes social media can give a different perspective, but when the majority of it shows the same thing and the same level of destruction, it only points towards one way.
If Israeli newspapers are calling this an ethnic cleansing, why do we not have people in the Western media that have the courage to call it the same? It's clearly not anti-Semitism. Why on earth would Haaretz media or a Haaretz Israeli newspaper be anti-Semitic and want to see the undoing of Jews? Again, this goes back to AIPAC and back to lobbying. But to answer your question, that piqued my curiosity, and I couldn't believe that essentially everything that I had these presets to believe about Jews, everything was existential. Again, that sort of Holocaust upbringing in my mind culturally, seeing so many Holocaust movies, I kind of had these factory settings where I instantly always wanted to see Jewish people as the victim. And it was very hard for me to kind of shed that and to.
But a lot of Jewish people were victims here too.
Correct, but what I'm saying is my factory.
So it's not wrong for them to play the victim if they're genuinely being victims.
If they're genuinely being victims, correct. But when I say my factory settings, what I mean is that the second a Jewish person got hysterical about anything, I just assumed they were telling the truth and were the victims. I'm just kind of going back and assessing my own character flaws. I got this wrong in my political career. What you should do is not have these factory settings and actually examine the facts, right? And so when I started to do that, what I started noticing was I wasn't even allowed to ask a question. So I'd see something and then I'd say, well, what is this? And then suddenly it was anti-Semitism. And that right there to me signals you're not telling me the truth because you shouldn't have to do that, right? Nobody is going to side.
I think that works in almost every single debate in the world right now. I see it the other way around where you get being accused of being an Islamophobe if you dare to criticize anything on the Palestinian side, even if a lot of the stuff that's been going on is worthy of criticism.
I haven't seen that, and I say this as someone who was deeply critical of people that were Islamic throughout my entire career, because again, I jumped into politics and there's a certain perspective that you're supposed to have in America about Zionism, and you're supposed to kind of marry yourself to it. And despite all of the things that I now kind of blush when I look back on, that I sort of had those factory settings, they never kind of just like routinely decide.
I think Candace did an amazing job and raised some very good points. She was very honest in terms of her naivety, which is a very big thing to do. Previously, I did criticize Candace for her views and opinions, but on this particular topic, I think she did a very good job and I think she gained a lot of respect. If you enjoyed the video, please support me by liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Peace out.